Good evening, everyone, and hello. I'm David Allen Patali, your host for the Libby Book Club for WA. My guest tonight is the delightful Brooke Dunnell, who's going to be talking to us about her new novel, Last Best Chance, from Fremantle Press, which is our featured book of the month here on Libby Book Club for WA. But before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I am broadcasting to you tonight from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's really great to have everybody here tonight. A Libby Book Club for WA is, of course, totally free. You can join in on the chat. Every question is welcome. As Elizabeth Joly said, literature is a place everybody can meet. So I'd like to think that the Libby Book Club for WA is a place everybody could meet. So in that spirit, Brooke, welcome back to the Libby Book Club for WA. You're actually our first returning author. You actually appeared in October last year for your debut novel, The Glass House. You're now back with your second novel, Last Best Chance. How does it feel to be back? A very loaded question.
No, it feels great to be back. I didn't know that I was the first returning author, so that's a very nice surprise. But I was, so keen when I got the invitation because our last chat was so good. So I was dying to talk about the new book with you and with everyone.
Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful to have you back. And this is all thanks, of course, to Overdrive Australia, Libby ANZ, and also the State Library of WA. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Now, I guess the first question is the typical question. What is Last Best Chance all about?
Okay, so Last Best Chance is about, there's two main characters. So the first one I would say that we start with is Rachel. And she's in her early 40s. She's living in Perth. And after her marriage breaks up, she decides, look, this is my last best chance to have a baby. So she starts going through fertility treatment on her own. And when it doesn't really work out in Australia, she thinks, look, I'll just throw everything at the wall and I'm going to go to this fictional European city, Central European city, to get this treatment and just see, look, am I going to have a baby once and for all? And so living in this fictional European city that she goes to, which doesn't get named in the novel, is an English woman in her mid-20s called Jess. And she's living there. She teaches English as a second language. She lives with her partner who's from that country. And she's really, she loves it there, but she's really trying to find her place in that country and kind of make something from herself, of herself, rather than be kind of skipping between jobs and things like that. And so at the time that Rachel goes to this city where Jess lives in order to get this fertility treatment, it happens to coincide with a climate change expo that's drawing all this attention to this kind of forgotten city. And so the climate change expo that's happening puts Rachel's fertility treatment at risk because of this increased scrutiny, but it also brings potential for Jess. She thinks, oh, maybe I can kind of get in on the ground floor here and make a bit of a name for myself through my partner's contacts. So.
Thank you. And the thing I will observe about a Brooke Dunnell book is that there's the surface and there's everything else. One of the things I really enjoy about your writing is that it's like, they say there's a comedy of manners. You have the tragedy of manners, that there are particular ways people will talk and things that they will say, but what they really mean. And Rachel in particular has this wonderful cadence of observing in real time, that's not what they're really saying. So is a theme here, Rachel's quite secretive about her IVF treatment, about her wanting of a baby. Is there a theme here of there's the surface and there's a whole lot of other things going on?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's interesting you say that because I've been talking to people recently about kind of writing and stuff like that, trying to work out what I'm going to write next. And one idea that I keep coming back to is when I have kind of a premise for a story or I start a longer piece, when I feel like it's not going anywhere is when it feels really thin. And that's like the word I keep coming back to is, oh, that story's too thin. And that I think it is, there's nothing going on below the surface. There's no layers to it. There's no kind of like meeting of ideas, so to speak. And so that's what I kind of look for in a idea for any story, whether it's a short story, whether it's a novel as well. And so I don't know if I kind of like am consciously when I'm writing thinking, oh, what are the layers here? But I think it's this overall impression of, there's kind of meat going on. There's things happening below the surface. And I really love that tragedy of manners idea because that one of the things I really like in writing is that contradiction between what people say and what they mean, and how you can show that in dialogue, in characterization, in subtext, all that kind of thing. So I'm really pleased that you got that impression from this book.
Absolutely. And can we just maybe dive into Rachel's story to start with? Because when we first meet Rachel, she's in an IVF clinic in this very impersonal, almost uh, brutal environment. They're quite cold. It's very clinical, and she just knows the drill. She's done this so many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about when we first meet Rachel? What stage is she at in this IVF journey?
Yeah, so basically the novel is really set over these 3.5 weeks that form her IVF cycle, which does follow, a woman's menstrual cycle. And so when you start, it's her first kind of appointment for this cycle, in which she's at the end hoping to transfer a donor embryo, because she needs an embryo because her eggs are basically too old, unfortunately for her. And because she's doing it as a single woman, she also needs sperm, basically. So at the start of the novel, it's that day 1 or day 2 appointment that you have when you're doing an IVF cycle, and they're basically having blood tests and ultrasounds to make sure that kind of your body's starting up the way that it's supposed to in order for this stuff to work. And the way her treatment works is that when her cycle starts, she's still in Australia and she kind of gets all the go ahead. And then at a certain time when it's most opportune, she flies to this fictional country and they kind of pick up the treatment there. So it's that first morning, she's in there, she's with all the other women, no one's looking each other in the eye. The nurses know what's going on, the patients know what's going on. It's very, regimented, kind of soulless in a way, but it kind of needs to be as well. You can't really go into those things with a lot of emotion. I think every time you get quite exhausted by it. So she's done this plenty of times. She's tried to have these things done, all the way through in Australia, and it hasn't worked. And so she kind of knows the score and what's happening, except for the fact that she's going to make this leap in a few days and go to this fictional country, and they're going to pick up the treatment from there.
It's a very of why does Rachel want to have a baby? She's single, she's broken up her relationship. Is it a fixation? Is it a deeper desire?
Yeah.
What's the motivation here?
That is a super good question, because that's what Rachel asks herself throughout the novel, basically. She's kind of, so her story with her marriage breaking down is, it didn't break down over the lack of children at all. It broke down for kind of much more natural reasons, but not to say that's not a natural reason, but it broke down because of a personality mismatch, growing apart. And so when she went into this marriage with her ex-husband, whose name's Ben, she was kind of on the fence about having children. And because Ben's a teacher, he said to her, look, I spend all day with kids, and I've decided I don't want to have them for myself. And Rachel kind of thought, right, decision is made for me. He doesn't want kids. I don't want them enough to kind of rock the boat. So this is the life I'm going to have. And then when their marriage breaks up, when she's in her late 30s, she's kind of got this, well, I no longer have the Ben reason for not having children. What is my reason for not having children? Do I have a reason for not having children? And she kind of goes into it in this, it's not that she's ambivalent, but she's kind of, I think, at the forefront of her mind is, I don't want to look back and regret that I didn't try. And then once she's kind of in the kind of medicalization of it, because it escalates from the treatments and stuff, it seems quite straightforward at first when she's about 38, and then each time it doesn't work, there's kind of higher stakes, more intervention. And then she's kind of really on the, I guess, she's kind of on the conveyor belt, and she's not really sure about, she's just kind of going with the flow. And it's not that she's changed her mind or anything, but she's kind of got into this, it's about the IVF, and she kind of has to think more consciously, especially later, about the child and the baby that she's actually trying to have.
And I really appreciate you that you depict the costs involved. Not just it's emotional cost, it's time, but also it's money. This is really expensive, and I really enjoy it as well. Like you laying out the decision points that she's gone through and that she's had to debate with herself in this. Yeah, it's quite confronting a lot of the time. Like, yeah,
Yeah, and I think she says in there, if someone could have said to her, you will definitely have a baby, she's like, okay, I would pay anything, any money is fine. But when you're kind of throwing in money, every time a little bit more, things are rising and stuff like that, then not knowing whether you're going to get the outcome you want at the end of it does make things a little bit more kind of fraught in her mind, because she doesn't like to think about what is the cost of this, because you don't like to associate children with costs, but for the time that she does not have a child, she can't help but think of the financial cost, the physical cost, the emotional cost, the time cost, all of those kind of things. As long as there isn't a baby to kind of go, it was all worth it.
absolutely. And sorry, my very naked daughter just came in from the bath.
I did. I only saw a peeking hand. I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
But I can hear my dogs outside the door as well.
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to get in. Everyone wants to know what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you, Brooke. And just a reminder, you can jump into the chat if you're listening along. Ask Brooke anything. If you read, I'm trying not to give too much away. That's the dance we have to do.
Yeah.
Uh, we'll do the best we can. If you do have a question for Brooke, jump in the chat and I'll weave it into our chat as we go. So,
Please
um,
do.
Brooke, on Rachel, she's quite secretive. I found it
Mhm.
very interesting. She tells no one. She doesn't
Yeah.
workmate. She doesn't even tell her mum.
Yeah.
Are secrets in a way a form of power, but also corrosive?
That's a really good question. I think they're I think for Rachel, they turn into power. She does kind of have this, I guess, power, not over her mother, but when she interacts with her mother, who's a little bit difficult but well-meaning. I think she's kind of thinking, if I give you this information, you will, have some control over it. Even if it's only, she'll either wish Rachel well or she'll tell her that she's doing the wrong thing. And Rachel's kind of like, I do not want her opinion in either way. And so that's why she doesn't share it with her. But I think also probably, and I don't know if this is kind of spoken in the novel or not, but there's also that idea that if you don't tell anyone about it, it's not really real. And so when it's like it's a kind of a personal thing, that you're going through and that you're attempting, and people don't really talk about it, and they often don't talk about it when they're having, fertility treatment and stuff. It's not necessarily seen as great, dinner chat kind of thing. And so often I would find particularly that people will kind of maybe tell you about it after they've done it, and after, the baby's been brought into the world, they might say, oh, actually, this was the journey that we went on. So it seemed to me to be, I guess, hopefully quite realistic of Rachel not telling anyone while she's in the middle of it. And also the fact that she's kind of given this impression, because in her marriage they decided to not have children. I guess people aren't really asking her, are you going to try and have a baby, especially because she's single, so she can kind of just, kind of go under the radar, just tell her boss, oh, I'm just going on leave, I'm going on a holiday, tell her mother she's going on a holiday. And then she just hopes that, look, if it ends up working and I come back with a baby, I'll have a
Yeah.
story for them, you know?
That's what I really enjoyed about it. It's the decision, I suppose, in drama terms, to tell the straight story, to tell this is really how people do things. It,
Yeah.
you can do an obvious treatment of the story, like everybody knows, and she goes off to the country, and it's kind of this, page-turning madcap sort of story. But no, there's so much more depth to just telling it how it really is. And
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
to the glass house, the way you hone in on the brutal reality of things,
Yeah.
sitting with the complication of how things really are.
Yeah. I think that's, my kind of urge when writing is that, like, people don't really say things the way that they are, and or they say things and people misunderstand, and all those kind of complications and stuff I personally find really interesting as a writer and as a reader. But I know that there is, I think my editor once said to me in a very nice way, but she said, oh, what I love about your books is that nothing really happens. And so, and I think what she meant was, there's no big drama, like people don't confront each other and like find out really devastating things and stuff. But because I don't, that's not the way that I experience life. And I think if people confronted me and told me devastating things, I wouldn't know how to behave. Whereas you kind of know how to behave with the unspoken and stuff like that. And I just find those kind of complexity, I find it a bit more complex, and thinking about, if she hasn't told anyone, what is kind of the ripple effect of that, as opposed to the ripple effect of putting everything out in the open. They're just two different ways of approaching it, really.
Oh, I like it. It's Hilary Mantel-ish. It's like the
Oh,
sort of compassionate ruthlessness.
oh,
Like,
thanks.
yeah, yeah. And echoing back to when we had a chat about when we talked about the Glass House, your debut, it's that I've heard your work described as it's the domestic drama, but I write that too, which I love, because it's honing in on something, like you say, like there aren't huge explosions or anything like that,
Yeah.
but look under the surface, there's depth charges going off.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, they are just, ultimately, it just comes down to what are the stories you like to tell, what are the stories you like to read, and they're the kinds of things I like to read. But also, if you kind of try and theorize about it, I guess it's kind of like, well, most of life is lived in a domestic way, isn't it? Hopefully most people are spending at least 16 hours of their day at home. So, and that's the people they know the best, and the people who they have the most complicated relationships with. You can behave so much differently to friends and colleagues and stuff than you will to your partner or your brothers and sisters or your parents, because there's so much less kind of load going on there. And so that's what I find interesting, is like how do different families behave, is kind of like the Glass House and a little bit of Last Best Chance. And now it's like, the families that you make for yourself, and then what kind of happens to them, especially if you can't, or if you're having trouble kind of making your own family, which I guess Rachel is in a biological way and Jess is in a kind of a social way.
Well, Brooke, I was wondering if you would be able to share a bit of Last Best Chance with us. This is a total Dorothy Dixer question, but
Yeah. Oh, what a surprise. Don't mind if I do. Yeah, so this is a scene just before Rachel goes to this fictional European city. So as I said, as you said, she hasn't told her mum. What she's told her mum is just that she's going to this place for an experimental kind of holiday. It's a forgotten kind of gem corner of Europe kind of thing. And so this is when they're in the middle of their breakfast a couple of days before Rachel goes away. "What's that you're drinking?" Jean asked now, with Rachel's latte half finished. She lifted it to her nose. "Smells funny. Are you on some health kick?" There was no point answering. Jean would decide for herself. She took a sip and scowled. "That's disgusting. What is it?" "No, it isn't." Rachel held out her hand until Jean passed the cup back, then swallowed a mouthful as proof. It was bad, of course. Only someone who's never tasted caffeine or cow's milk would say decaf and oat were good substitutes, but not as bad as her mother made out, and it was better than nothing. "Is it the new thing? I remember when ordering a cappuccino was exotic. When I was your age, we had instant." "You don't remember being my age," Rachel wanted to say. "You were still a year away from picking yourself up off the floor." A server came to clear the table. Jean caught her by the sleeve to give feedback on the Eggs Benedict, every word of which she intended to be passed on to the clearly busy and uninterested chef. Rachel wanted to smack her mother's hand away, tell her to stop grabbing at people and their belongings. Keep your hands to yourself. It was one of the first lessons she'd teach her own child, compassionately. She'd also teach them not to let anyone grab, even grandmothers. While they were eating, Jean hadn't allowed the conversation to be steered towards Rachel. Now she turned the wheel herself. "This thing," she said, mouth pinched like she could still taste the decaf. "It's this week, isn't it?" "Friday night." "Where's this place again?" Jean was pretending she forgot, but Rachel knew she told Conrad and Carly everything. "It's meant to be fascinating," she said. "Oh, I bet, if you like blocks of flats and deprivation." Jean had not been to Europe, had barely been out of the country other than 2 package tours of Southeast Asia. Rachel let her gaze drift, her hands laced gently over her abdomen, inside which the follicles were growing. I don't know why you're going there of all places, Jean whined. Why not Bali, somewhere normal? If Rachel were going to Bali, Jean would have told her to go to New Zealand. If it was New Zealand, she would have told her to holiday at home. If at home, she would have crowed, Why don't you go to Europe? You're single. It's cheap, Rachel responded, and unique. There's something about it that appeals to me. If I was going overseas, I'd go to France. Jean stepped on the A sound, so it burst like a grape, or Spain, or Italy. She grimaced, but I suppose you've already seen those places with Ben. Rachel nodded and tried to look wistful. It was fine if her mother thought the trip had something to do with Ben. That was her opinion of everything Rachel did. Jean was proving to be more hung up on Rachel and Ben's failed marriage than anyone. Is it supposed to be edgy or something, this place? It was a cheap package, Rachel said again. A 4.5-star hotel for less than 100 a night. Where else can you find that? Probably Iran. I'll stop there.
Oh, please keep running.
She
I,
keeps
I had to underline that. If I was going overseas, I'd go to France. Jean, the A sound so it burst like a grape.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
I think I originally had it burst like a frog, but I was like, that's terrible. You can't say that.
And
Had to change it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, great. And I see what you mean as well. I meant to say I said domestic drama before, but I meant to say domestic noir. I think that's a
Oh,
really
yes.
that's an excellent description of the what you create. It's got like a dread to it, a brittleness, a coldness, but at the same time, you know something warm and lovely is happening. There's so many multiple ways of reading. I'm geeking out here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I think that idea of dread is
Yeah.
hopefully inherent in, because people are not being straightforward. And when she gets to this fictional city, it's very non-straightforward when it promised to be, a good experience, and then it becomes very kind of dicey and uncertain, and that's kind of like when you don't know what's going on, and when you don't know what people think and they're not telling you the truth, that's when dread does come into it, because there's no stability, there's nowhere to kind of put your feet down, basically.
And let's jump to Jess, who is our resident in this unnamed city. She loves her partner Victor. She loves the apartment that they're in, but there's she's just struggling to connect.
Yeah.
She can't put her feet down for some reason. Can you tell us about Jess and her experience here?
Yeah, so Jess is, like I said, she's in her mid-20s. I think she's about 26. And she met Victor when she was at uni in the UK, just doing a communications degree, kind of a party girl, having a good time, age appropriate. She was went straight to uni from school. And while she was there, this very charming, tall, dark, and handsome older man from this forgotten Central European country came with his two friends on a kind of exchange scholarship kind of thing, because they all have master's degrees. And she eventually followed him back to this city. And he's very, he's not demanding or controlling or anything. He was just saying, look, basically, in as many words, if you love me, you'll have to come back to my country, because I'm deeply involved in my country, and deeply involved in my city, and determined to kind of make it a real thing on the world stage. And Jess is kind of like, look, I'm up for it. Let's go. And when she gets there, Victor's great. His friends are very warm and welcoming to her, even though she's, almost about 10 years younger than them. They live in a really nice apartment. He chose an apartment in the area of town that she likes the best. She's got a few jobs going on, which she's kind of recognizes, just being a native English speaker, I have these privileges over my friends who they're all, in their 30s doing PhDs, and they don't get work as good as her. It's all this gig work, kind of cleaning work and delivery work and things like that. And she, because she's a native English speaker, she gets this quite cushy jobs teaching English, which is pressing play and pause on the ancient cassette player. Yeah, turn over, have a cup of tea with the older ladies who are doing the classes. And then she also does some tutoring work, also because she's a native speaker, and she works in a bar. So she's kind of putting all these jobs together, which I think a lot of people have experience of these days, the kind of gig economy and trying to put things together. And Victor and all his friends are doing the same thing as well. But she really feels like, and I think maybe she's got a little bit of, Western exceptionalism. She's kind of like, look, I want to make a name for myself in this place. I feel like I'm just, Victor's partner, basically. And so she kind of takes the opportunity. She's a little bit she's got more guts than brains, maybe, which is great for her. She's probably the opposite of Rachel, who's got all brains and no guts, probably. But Jess decides, so in as part of this climate change expo that's about to happen, and Victor's very involved in this because he's got his finger in a lot of pies and things like that. There's this rumor going around that, maybe this reclusive solar panel billionaire, who's this New Zealand woman, fictional, of course, she may appear for the first time in, I think, 2 years. She's been out of the spotlight. There's all these rumors going around. Is she dead? That kind of, has she been replaced by a double? That kind of Avril Lavigne kind of rumor and stuff like that. But she's proposed to come to this climate change expo because she's got heritage from this country. And Victor's involved with that. And he has this offhand kind of comment to Jess at the beginning, or the friends do. They say, Victor might get to work with this billionaire. And then Jess comes up with this whole idea that she's going to be the one person who interviews the billionaire and gets an article in all the newspapers, and then she'll be famous, and then she'll have a career. And she kind of decides that with all she's got is a link to this kind of English language street arts newspaper that, has written a few of her reviews because it pays so little and stuff. But she's decided, I'm going to leverage my opportunities. Yeah.
I quite liked her. She's
Yeah.
like,
She's
in a
all
way,
right.
is she kind of like a foil for Rachel? Because
Yeah.
they've got a destiny to come together, but
Yeah.
they're both very observant people. They're both very secretive as well. I really like the observation that Jess has when she's meeting the nonnas, that she should stop complimenting someone when they speak good English because it's condescending.
Yes. Yeah.
Someone who has the privilege of being the person who's like, what, how did you put it? It's like won the language war kind of thing.
Yeah. I think the language lottery, I think it was that, just because you're a native English speaker, you get all these privileges, and especially in this country, although it's based on kind of things I've observed. And that's something else I've observed, that when someone speaks English as a second language, usually better than a native speaker because they've learned all the grammar and but if you compliment them, they're always like, oh no, it's I'm not word perfect, therefore no. And so it is a little bit condescending, like, oh, aren't you clever, kind of thing. So you just, and Jess has eventually learned this. I think it probably took her a few goes. Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about why? So Rachel has chosen. We don't name the country at all.
No, no.
City. So again, it's the domestic noir. It's got that.
Could
It's
be anywhere.
a bit strange. Everything's
Yeah.
a bit strange, which I really, yeah, which I
Yeah. And I've deliberately tried to make the city strange in several ways, especially when there's a point at which Jess kind of describes the old town, which, if you've been to a lot of European cities, this one's kind of based on a combination of Prague and Brunei and Czech Republic and Tallinn in Estonia, Belgrade in Serbia, lots of places that I've been, Bucharest, Budapest, that kind of thing. And you'll find that they've often got the old town, which is the lovely pedestrianized, architecturally beautiful, original kind of settlement. And then often they'll have a new town very close to it, which could be any age, new could mean 100 years, later than the old town and stuff. And so Jess is walking, so it's only named the old town, the new town, and Jess and Jess and Victor live in the old town, and she's walking down one of the main streets to her English teaching job at the library with the nonnas, as you said. And she kind of describes how, because this town has been raised and rebuilt and raised and rebuilt and has had a dictator and that kind of thing in the past, that the names of the streets are kind of off a little bit. They don't really make 100% logical sense. And then the numbers of the places, some of the numbers are repeated and then there'll be a missing number and stuff. So I did design it so that hopefully it gives that effect that you never quite know where you are, because you can't always rely on, I guess, the geographical cues around you. You could be anywhere because, yeah, it's not a real place.
And why did so this particular country has I suppose cheap IVF, it's got
Yeah.
access to different things, and that's why Rachel, it was appealing for her to go there. But in doing that, there's a power dynamic here, isn't there? There's people that can come in and
Yeah.
access, but to what cost to the
Yeah.
locals?
Yeah. So it was based on, so originally, like years ago, because it was a very kind of long burn of a novel, it existed before The Glass House existed, although in a much different form. And it was based on reading online these kind of forums by usually American women who were having IVF in specifically the Czech Republic and Ukraine, because you could get really high quality treatment there. It's kind of like the medical tourism that, in certain places you can get plastic surgery and dental work and stuff like that in particular countries are known for it. So you could get all the quality of the United States plus a bit of a holiday in the Czech Republic, although I don't know, as Rachel will show, it's not really a holiday, but it's a bit of a break, for cheaper than it would cost in the United States. And I thought IVF is such an alienating practice anyway, and you are so at sea and unable to get your footing and stuff, to mix my metaphors. And so what would it be like to be in a country that you're not familiar with, where English isn't the first language, but where people are catering to you in probably as it's depicted in Last Best Chance, at least in a much kind of even amped up kind of way compared to the treatment she has at home. Because in the opening scene, when the cycle is starting and she's interacting with the nurses, and it's not that they're uncaring, but it's all very kind of we have a schedule for this and it's by the book, and here's your appointment, here's your next appointment, okay, see you later, that kind of thing. And once she goes to this country, there's massages and there's group therapy and there's acupuncture and there's catered meals to make her healthy and all this kind of stuff. And so you get this kind of care and kind of almost pampering, which Rachel is desperate for, because she hasn't told anyone. She's not really big on, she doesn't really have super close friends. She hasn't told her mum. She hasn't told her work. She's kind of a bit touch starved probably. And so to have all these people taking such good care of her, she's really thrilled by. But then as kind of Jess's, as she gets more involved with the IVF clinic, as the Climate Change Expo goes on, she kind of points out, or at least reflects on the emotional and physical labor that the women in this country, who are not as economically privileged as Rachel, are going into in order to provide that care to Rachel. So one of Victor's friends, or his friend's partner, who is now one of their friends, she's donating eggs to the same clinic that Rachel's going to, because it's a massive payday. So she kind of calculates what she can make from her cleaning job. She's doing a PhD, she's doing a cleaning job, and then on top of that, it's months worth of income to donate eggs. And she's come to that, there is, I think that's like unavoidable that there's some exploitation there, but that character Lena is very she's very firm with Jess when Jess asks her about it. She's like, look, this is my choice. It's just a reality that finances are different, and I have decided to do this. And she's determined that she's not, a victim or something like that. And then Jess is kind of like, oh, well, can I kind of go on over the top of her and say, no, you are being exploited and stuff like that. So there's a kind of those layers there that are kind of unavoidable when it comes into that, getting that care provided in a different place that's not as economically well off as the countries that Jess and Rachel come from.
For sure. And that's one of the joys of the book, is that, yeah, you get sucked into this story. You get sort of led into this world, and the further you get in, the stranger and more familiar it becomes. And then all these other issues start coming in, and
Yeah.
you just keep leading us in. You just
Well, because you're on the conveyor belt with Rachel, like you've signed up for this. I mean, you can't get off, I guess, but it's going ahead, and she's determined. She has a bit of a wobble when she first gets there about what am I doing, and then she recommits, and then she'll kind of do anything basically as the days go on to make this, to at least get this opportunity which it presents itself to her.
in crafting the story, did you try to be very patient in allowing these turns to happen, rather than it having, like we were talking about before, having it be like, a soap opera, these dramatic turns? You let things develop quite naturally, and
Yeah.
realizations as the reader, you start thinking about different things at different stages. It all just clamps in on you.
Yeah. So I guess the whole thing was, once it came into this version of it, because the original version of it when I wrote it years ago was a novella, so it was half the length. It was only the Rachel character, the Jess character didn't exist. And she had this IVF, but there wasn't really the kind of scrutiny and risk that happens with the climate change expo. And I would say, going back to what we were talking about right at the start, I really liked that novella because I liked, I really liked the city that I'd invented, basically. And I thought, oh, this is like a cool premise, and I was really into it. And so I think because I was so into that, I kind of then, but it was quite thin, to go back to what we were saying. And so the layers came into it with the introduction of Jess, the introduction of the Climate Change Expo, and then the risk to maybe Rachel, maybe they're not going to actually let her do this because in going there, the country has kind of said to her, oh, well, we only provide IVF treatment for married heterosexual couples, but we know that you've got a husband who's not coming. And it's kind of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And Rachel's like, okay, yeah, cool. I've got a husband who's not coming. And then when she gets there, that kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of gets, a little bit like, oh, actually, we've got all this additional scrutiny because of the Climate Change Expo. There's all these government, that people have finally figured out where our country is and that it exists and all this kind of stuff. And actually, we do really need to tick the boxes and stuff like that. And so I think I've forgotten what your question was. So leading us through. No, that was the previous question. Do you remember what it was?
Was that you have the patience to
Oh, the
allow
patience.
the story to breathe, rather than intervening with big explosions or whatever. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I should have exploded the IVF clinic. I'll do that in the sequel. No, I
what
think
you to play with. Yeah.
I think what I was saying with that in the evolution of the novel was when I'd come up with this kind of the higher stakes and the risk to Rachel might not get what she wants, and also introducing that environment aspect, which I was very interested in, the idea that she's spending all this money to have a baby, and yet, what kind of future might the baby be born into? And then I kind of, it was quite natural in the sense that, to me, the IVF cycle kind of maps onto that conventional structure of a narrative where you've got the conflict and the tension escalates and the climax and then the resolution, which is, the conflict is the treatment, and the treatment continues and it ramps up and ramps up and ramps up. And then you finally have the ultimate procedure that she's there for, which is to have this donor embryo transferred. That's the baby that she's going for. And then the resolution is, you find out whether the cycle worked or not. And so that was quite that kind of following the cycle. So like I said, it covers the 3.5 or so weeks of that from the beginning of the novel to the end. That kind of gave me a kind of structure. But then I was thinking, okay, at these kind of peak points where, they're doing a blood test or doing another exam or making sure that she's ovulated, all the kinds of stuff that she needs to. I thought at each point that this kind of question of, well, actually the nudge, nudge, wink, wink thing is falling away. And I thought it's just got to each time just be dialed up a tiny bit more, because it's getting closer to the actual expo, and the kind of the scrutiny and the kind of oversight is just getting a little bit stronger each time, and it's delivered in a kind of a velvet glove, shall we say? It's with Olga, the manager of the IVF clinic. She's very,
Yeah.
lovely and patient and softly spoken, but every time, where's your husband? Maybe we can't do this if you don't have a husband. And so just throwing throwing obstacles in Rachel's way every time she meets her.
Brooke, we got some great questions in the chat. So our
Yeah.
first one is from Jeho. She says, in your acknowledgement, you mentioned sage advice by David Price on a scene that was missing.
Oh, yes.
Now you can't imagine the book without it. May we know which scene that is? And that's David Price, Freo Press author, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Dark Tales from the Long River.
Yes. Yeah. So, so I got to go. I was just in the finishing stages of I guess the first draft of this was it was probably actually around the time. Oh no, it was much after we had before we had our Libby chat. But I knew there was something kind of, something missing maybe, or maybe I subconsciously knew. And I got to go to the Big Sky Festival in Geraldton. And it was just before the Glass House came out, and so David Price and I we kind of got picked up from the airport at the same time. I hadn't met him before. Turned out he knew my dad, which is Perth, that's Perth for you. And after we'd kind of been settled and stuff, he said, "Oh, do you want to go and get a coffee?" So we went to that lovely dome down on the foreshore at Geraldton, and we each talked about our projects and our books. And I told him about this book, and I said, there's a character called Rachel really wants to have a baby, and there's a character called Jess who doesn't. And somehow it came around to David said, "Oh, did they ever talk about that?" And I thought, no, I don't think they do. So the scene in which once Rachel and Jess have met, and they kind of, it's not really a spoiler, they kind of outline their arguments on either side, was, and now, that would be a real hole in the story if these two main characters with their opposing views never actually had a conversation about it, and that's where there is the potential for, the conflict kind of coming to its head, I guess.
Oh, thank you, David.
That was the scene. So thank you for
Oh, I'm glad you went for a coffee with him.
Yeah. What would have happened without that coffee? It would have just been missing, a third of the book, maybe. Yeah.
I suppose that leads pretty naturally to a question in that when you wrote Last Best Chance as a novella, that probably
Yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah.
But now you had one character. Now you have two main, and finding ways to weave them together that would be quite challenging, because it's not exactly dual narrative. It is, but it isn't. It's sort of just two people dancing around the same, grappling with similar kind of morality challenges.
Yeah, yeah. So the way it's structured, for people who haven't read it yet, there's a chapter from Rachel's third person point of view, what she's doing, and then the next chapter will be Jess, and then Rachel, Jess, moves chronologically. It's not every single day of these 3.5 weeks, and usually they'll have alternate days, although some days it's both of them, especially towards the end. And I don't think there's any actual text from the original idea that ended up in this in the final novel. And so when I started it kind of from scratch, so to speak, and I did have this idea of Jess, I mapped out a kind of I want to say Excel spreadsheet, but I can't even use Excel for text. So it was really just a Microsoft Word document with a table in it where I outlined what are the days, what are the dates, especially what happens to happen in her IVF cycle. There's certain days on which certain things need to happen. and then kind of fitting Jess in around it. And I think, you know, whether it's a good or a bad thing, I do think that even though they get equal story time and stuff, I do think it's Rachel's story. I don't think that the book would not exist without the Rachel story. And so she is a little bit of a foil for Rachel, but I did, you know, I really wanted to present that alternate viewpoint of, you know, because Jess is at a very different stage in her life. She's got very different kind of concerns than Rachel does, where she's living and things like that. And I also wanted to explore as close as possible to the people who are from this country and what their life is like, and the impact that having an IVF clinic there has on it, but without having one of their points of view. Because even though they're not real and there's no kind of people that I'm talking about, I did want to keep them kind of mysterious and stuff. And they do, hopefully they do have that kind of stoic, unspoken kind of quality about them. And so it was better to have an expat character who thinks she knows the country, and she knows them as well as she can, you know, having lived there for 3 years or so, but doesn't know them as well as she might do eventually, and also is just a little bit, you know, people like her, she fits in fine, but she's not one of them. And maybe it's just because she's a blabbermouth and, you know, acts before she speaks and stuff, and they do not. So she's just got her natural kind of, I guess, qualities that she can't shake even when she lives in this kind of cold, stoic country.
And just like she unlocks those depths, because with Rachel, I guess we're on a strange but familiar track. But
Yeah.
then the elements that Jess unlocks allows the story to go in a direction I was not expecting.
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah, because, you know, ideally,
Yeah.
in this kind of situation, Rachel would not meet any locals except for Olga,
Yeah.
the nurses, but she's not going to meet, you know, women who donate eggs, women who are surrogates, especially with the kind of pampered kind of, I guess, cocooned kind of treatment that they give the women who go there. They throw, you know, all the bells and whistles. She's got a chaperone everywhere she goes, like all her needs are met. But and in that way, she's not going to really bump up against actual local people who live there very much. And so, and that was when I wanted to kind of get into that, but I didn't. So in having Jess's friend be an egg donor, I wanted to filter that through Jess, because I don't really know what it's like to be an egg donor. I don't really know what it's like, especially to donate eggs to women who are going to, you know, take those eggs and make babies in different countries. It's a very complex thing. And so to have that information given to Jess, and then Jess is kind of the naive kind of, you know, a little bit bamboozled kind of character. She's, again, maybe a little bit of a foil for the audience who don't, you know, we don't really know how these things work necessarily, and what emotions go into them, and that kind of thing.
Well, it leads us pretty nicely to, we've got a question from, I hope I get pronunciation right, Anushka Amor. She's saying, I'm hearing your concerns regarding economic disparity in this fictional unnamed city and country.
Yep.
You've alluded to several places in Europe that may have informed or shaped the novel's setting. Can you comment on your choice not to name a particular place?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because probably in reading it, you know, to have it not even have a made up name it might be a little bit frustrating even. And so, and you might think, as I did at first, you know, this happens in the Czech Republic and stuff, we'll just set it in the Czech Republic. But the reason why I wanted it to be fictional was because I wanted to be able to invent a city, a culture, a way of doing things, a way of kind of what the rules are and things like that, without having to put that on an actual country with its people, and like kind of, you know, take them for my narrative purposes and not really understand them. Kind of like, I mean, kind of like Jess might be doing to a certain extent. And also like I said, that with the original novella, making up that city and what its architecture might be, and its kind of confusing street names and weird history, and a ugly 80s building up against a beautiful kind of Baroque building and stuff like that. I really wanted the freedom to kind of play with that and invent it, rather than depicting a place that really existed. And also I wanted it to have that kind of unstable, uncertain quality, which Rachel especially, but just to a certain extent, experiences in being, a stranger in a strange land, trying to make lives for themselves, trying to make families for themselves and stuff. If the name is never said, if you never quite know where it is, if you never can quite locate it geographically on a map, hopefully for readers that contributes to that effect as well. So there were, various reasons for that. But it's a great question.
Yeah. I don't know. I liked that I didn't know. It like I said, it added to the noirishness of it. It was I don't know. Did you read? Is it Zoe Delisle's The Night Village? It's got that,
Yes.
like, that's the Barbican, and I'm extremely familiar with that place. However, that's not the Barbican.
Yeah, she's kind of depersonalized it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I just love those effects. I think it goes back to there's now I'm going to forget what it's called. There's a Michael Chabon novel called The Yiddish Policeman's Union, which is this alternate version of America that proposes that in 1947, instead of the state of Israel being formed over Palestine and stuff, that actually the worldwide powers decided, look, we're going to give Jewish people a state in Alaska, which is unpopulated. And so they get given this country and capital city, and I think it might be named I haven't read it for years, but it's coming to the end. So they have a 50-year lease, and it's coming to the end. It's like the mid-90s, and they can't work out whether the city's going to continue existing or whether all the Jewish people who migrated there are going to have to go back to the places that they came from. And he invents kind of street names and this whole complex history of this place. And I just thought, oh, you can do this, it was just, and so that was the first time when I thought, oh, you can make up a city and hopefully have that quality where the city is, as they you say about certain books, that the city is a character in itself. And so that was, I wanted to play with that and have fun with that. And if it adds to the uncertainty, the noir, the unspokenness, then that's all, contributing.
Well, Brooke, when are you most engaged in your writing? When is it that you're deepest in the flow? Is it creating that realistic unreality, or is it engaging with the characters and their emotions? When do you feel, I suppose, the most alive at the page when you're not,
That's a great question. My instinct is to say when I'm writing dialogue, because I feel like, how sometimes you kind of have that idea, whether it's woo-woo or not, but you kind of like, oh, the words were just channeling through me, like I was a kind of an open vessel to something that was coming out. And, whether you believe that or not, but when I have that sense the most, where I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know where this is coming from, I'm just kind of like transcribing it, would be dialogue scenes, kind of like the scene between Rachel and her mother. That just kind of, I could just hear her kind of sniping at her, and what she would say, like, Iran and France and that kind of thing. So I guess, when I feel kind of like the words come most easily, I would probably say it's dialogue. Maybe I should write a play. I don't know what I'm doing with novels and stuff like that. Whereas with the, for example, landscape and place and setting and things like that, even though it's very important in The Glass House, there's the house that she grew up in, and then in this one, it's the whole city. That comes a bit harder. It requires a bit more work. I can kind of feel the gears kind of turning, and I'm having to think of, the logistics of, oh, if she crossed the room and there's a mirror there, well, then where's the door and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I guess the dialogue just comes out because people just talk, don't they? And there's no kind of,
no,
nothing has to kind of prop that up, I guess. Yeah.
believe it or not, Brooke, we've got 5 minutes to go.
Uh,
It always
I would have
happens.
said we had 45 minutes to go.
Dang, no, this always happens. Just as, I think we're just getting warmed up, really. There's so much more to ask you.
Yeah.
So I was going to say as well, from your first novel, The Glass House, I'm still packing up Don's house.
Are
I'm still,
you?
oh yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
like, I'm trying to organize everything, and it just stays with you.
Yeah.
That's what I really, really enjoyed about Last Best Chance is it stayed with me. It, like I said before, it didn't. I thought I was familiar with the story, but it wasn't, and then it kept turning on me, and I kept going into places I didn't expect. Was this a book that was harder to write than The Glass House because of those turns, or did it just come quite naturally after The Glass House? What was your experience?
It was probably harder to write because it's got hopefully more complex kind of social and environmental and issues like that. The Glass House is quite self-contained into like interpersonal relationships, family, protection of children, fathers, that kind of thing. Whereas this one I had to kind of think about, oh, global politics and, what are the kind of greenwashing of stuff at a climate change conference and that kind of thing. But I think with this one, and something that I'm glad to have the chance to kind of say, is that this book, because maybe you can tell or not, but I'm happy to say that I have done IVF myself and I didn't end up having a baby. And I have read certain books about a little bit about IVF, but people trying to have babies, having infertility problems and stuff like that. And I thought, every time I read them, I thought, I'm not getting the book that I want. And the book that I want is a little bit more ambiguous and a little bit more kind of questioning about, why do we want this? What is that? Yeah, the merry-go-round we get stuck on. What are the greater implications of putting all this kind of financial and environmental effort into having children? Not that I think everyone should have children. Your children are amazing, for example. It's great. But once you start thinking of paying heaps of money and going through a lot, you kind of, the calculations might be different. And I just thought, I want to read the book where there's not necessarily, because, by the end of the novel, once her cycle is over, we kind of leave with certain questions. But I wanted to be like, I don't want it to be about, oh, she's suddenly miracle pregnant. I wanted it to be about the arduous process, the questions you ask yourself, people questioning your motives, in that conversation between Rachel and Jess. She is asking her, well, why do you want to have a baby? And Rachel's kind of like, listen, you little upstart, you don't need to be asking me, kind of thing. And I wanted a book that was exploring the complexities and how it kind of comes up against issues of, where society is going, and money, and international disparities in that way, and in the environment and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, look, I'm just going to have to write it. And I think that's what often writers come up against, is this is the book I want to read, no one else has written it, so I guess I have to do it myself, kind of thing. And so I didn't have that sense as much in The Glass House, so probably it wasn't as I won't say it was like emotionally arduous or anything like that, but I just, it was a different experience writing this book that I felt like I wanted certain people in certain situations especially to have.
I suppose as a final comment, I'm picking up like a sense of rebelliousness almost. That there's a certain way that books are written or that have been, but you were like, no, I refuse to to buck that. I'm going to do my thing. I'm
Yeah.
going to do. I
Yeah, I'm
love
going to have nothing happen and everyone have
that.
simmering tension. And no, but seriously, like I think in
Yeah.
a different situation, a different agent or publisher or whatever would have said, yeah, but she needs to get miracle pregnant at the end.
Yeah,
And
and it's like, no,
luckily for me, that was never proposed. It's an IVF cycle. What happens? And so, yeah.
but congratulations on a
Thank you.
thoroughly wonderful second novel.
Thank
Last
you.
It's available still, Libby Book Club on Libby on your app. You can download it. You're over like 500 or 600 borrows for the month, which is an incredible result. So
Yeah.
congratulations.
That's amazing to think that many people are reading the book at once is so good. Yeah.
Thanks for coming back on Libby Book Club for WA, Brooke. It's been great to have you back. I can't believe we just smashed an hour of chat. We can keep going.
Yeah, we could. But thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your questions and for joining in. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Again,
We do have a question in the chat which just said, what are the books that we reference? So it was Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon.
yep, yep.
Um,
Chabon.
The Night Village by Zoe Delisle, which is Fremantle Press, and Dark Tales from the Long River by David Price, which is also Fremantle Press. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a few others in there. But yeah, but thank you for coming on, Libby. Brooke, it's been great to see you. And thank you everybody for joining in on the chat. It's always great to have our community around here. It's raining right now, so this is
Lovely book weather.
total book weather. So yeah, enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much and good night, everybody.
Thank you.